All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Madeleine Watson. I'm a product manager here with Crossref, and I'm the product manager for event data, which is what I'm hoping to talk to you about today. Sorry about that beige color writing. It's a bit hard to see, isn't it? So I want to talk to you about relationships. It's not only one of the themes for our conference, but it's very important in our community because when we think about research, we think about its relationships. What relationships does it have to other published knowledge who perform the research? What relationship does that researcher have to other researchers and to an institution? What relationship does the research have to a funder or to a grant? This is really, really important. Jennifer Lynn mentioned this earlier this morning because exposing these links, these relationships between research objects out in the real world creates a really, really rich map of connections that enables further scholarship. We know that research comes in many forms, and because it comes in many forms, there are lots of relationships to capture. Again, Jennifer was mentioning the article Nexus, and I've got that idea up here again. So things like preprints we've got up there, conference papers, articles, data sites, even protocols, they're all things that can be deposited, can be registered with Crossref or with another DOI registration agency. And these are all things that can have a relationship with each other as asserted by the publisher in their metadata. So our role as an organisation is to store these relationships. For example, we capture references, the citations, we can propagate those out. We have links between things, so links between, for example, datasite DOIs and Crossref DOIs. We also hold information about the people and the relationships that these things registered with us have with specific researchers. We have the funding information, the clinical trial information, the licenses, publication history, and so much more. And all of this comes into our idea of the article nexus. And crucially, all of this is sent to us by the publishers. But what about the relationships that exist between research and activity outside of the scholarly world and outside of what the publishers know about, things that the publishers don't assert themselves? We know that research artifacts undergo sort of a second life once they're published. Once they're online, they're linked and shared and discussed and commented on in a range of platforms, some of which are outside our traditional academic ecosystem. Data on these interactions are initially fragmented. They can be spread across a number of platforms, buried in places like social media, in blog sites, news sites, places like Wikipedia. But once extracted, perhaps refined, perhaps standardized in some way, they could provide really valuable insight into the consumption, the usage, and the impact of individual research items across this diverse, sometimes non-scholarly landscape. Kind of like these relationships, very crudely. So how articles, for example, are discussed in blog posts, how they're mentioned in tweets, how they're referenced on Wikipedia pages. Now, my colleagues Jennifer Lynn and Jeff Builder, along with Cameron Nayland of Curtin University, have written about how important scholarly infrastructure is for identification, for storage, for metadata, and for describing relationships. We have infrastructure already in our community like ORCID for identifying people. We've got infrastructure like DOIs and registration agencies for identifying research. And we have places like Dryad for data storage, for example. But they argue that what we as a community are missing is a transparent, centralized infrastructure for describing and recording the relationships between objects and resources. Dedicated infrastructure for collecting these kinds of relationships would provide a data source for those interested in a whole range of activities to then build upon. The question is, though, how do we collect this data and how do we provide it at an infrastructure level to everyone? And that's what we're going to talk about today. We started thinking about this a number of years ago, and event data is somewhat of our solution to that problem. It's a cross-ref service. It is currently in beta, and it's built off of the shared event data infrastructure, which we co-developed with DataSite, another registration agency. For those of you who are familiar with the work at PLOS, it came out of, sort of inspired by the PLOS ALM tool, which in turn came out of the open source Legato software, again, if any of you are familiar with that. So event data captures the relationships between research items and really specific activities on the web. So that means you can use it to discover where research is bookmarked and liked and shared and discussed and commented on, and much, much more beyond publisher platforms. So an event itself is a single data point. It's the record of a claim made about the existence of a relationship between something like a Wikipedia page and a DOI. So there's some examples up here. I mentioned already it could be that a DataSite DOI contains a link to a Crossref DOI, and we have those links captured in event data. It can be that a DOI was referenced in Wikipedia or someone mentioned it in a tweet. We also have data from hypothesis, so it can be that some annotations exist for a particular research object. Things in blogs, and very recently we're really excited to be able to include citations in patent data via Cambia Lens. The events themselves are actually delivered in JSON format. There's no user interface on top of it other than an API, and all the data is available via our open free query API, and it's been around and available for about 5 months or so now, and I think some of you in here today may have actually already taken a look at it. So events actually answer a whole range of things. So I was talking about the event as a singular data point, and these are some of the questions very strangely presented. I don't know why, but just imagine that you can actually read that. These are some of the questions it answers. So what links to what? What specific Wikipedia page, for example, links to what DOI? What was the agent that was used to collect the data? How was the link made? That's really important. Was it that somebody tweeted the DOI URL in their tweet, or did they actually use the publisher's article landing page URL? That might be a really interesting and important data point to someone. When was the link observed versus when do we think the link actually happened? So when did we get the record in our system versus when did the platform report that relationship occurred? What algorithms were used to collect it? And really, really crucially, what's the evidence that says this relationship occurred? So I just want to quickly show you what this actually looks like in the real world, what some of these relationships look like. On the left here, we've got an example of a tweet from a Twitter user, and that person has included a link to this particular Nature article. That's come through our system because I think it was the article landing page URL that was included. We've picked that up as an event, and when I have a look in event data, I can also see that we've recorded a couple of annotations from hypothesis for that same DOI. So you're starting to build up a really interesting map of the ways that this particular article is being consumed post-publication. Another more recent example is the Guardian paper in the UK a few weeks back. On their front page had an article that referenced a PLOS paper about insects. Somebody actually took a picture. It's almost like an analog event in a way. They took a picture of the paper, but then also included the DOI in their tweet, so we were able to pick that up in event data. And when I went in and had a look, I could see that we had also established events directly from The Guardian because we're checking their RSS feed, as well as a range of other newspapers where that DOI had been mentioned in articles as well. There was over 843 mentions on Twitter, so this was just one of the tweets that we captured. We also know that there was discussions on Reddit about this particular article, and it's been referenced at least 2 times in Wikipedia. Finally, this is one of our more recent examples. We've got a landing page here for lens.com. It's the landing page of a patent, and if you were to look in the citations tab, you would see a link there to a DOI, and we've captured that in event data as an event. What all these examples show, though, is that we're starting to be able to build this really, really comprehensive picture of how this research is linked and liked and shared and all those activities I mentioned before. And it's really, really valuable data if you're interested in things like impact analysis, discoverability and altmetrics, which we were just talking about earlier. But I'll come to that, I think, a little bit later. Because I just wanted to talk about the system itself, because I'd mentioned at the start that we built it as infrastructure. This is obviously a very crude drawing. I am not a developer, but essentially event data is a pipeline. We are getting data in from our data contributors, and I'll go through a list of those in a second. It's coming into this shared infrastructure which we co-run with DataSite, and it's being delivered via our API. I mentioned before that the events themselves include evidence. That's all the information that anyone would need to know about how we collected the data from a platform. So I think I mentioned before what agents were used, for example. All the evidence plus the events are available via API, so absolutely everything. I mentioned also before that the output of an event is in JSON format. It's in a REST API, so it really is intended for machine-to-machine use. Unless you're a person that really likes reading JSON, then go for it. Now the data itself, which again has rendered very strangely up there, so I'll talk you through it. Events are actually expressed as a triple, as a subject, verb, object triple. And that means this Wikipedia page references this specific article, or this data set relates to this particular article. We're seeing a lot of data in there already. We're registering up to around 200,000 events every day. And we have been running in beta now, as I said, for about 5 months or so, but we've been collecting data before that as well. And we're already up to 58 million events. So there is a lot of activity that we're registering in the platforms that we're looking at currently. And there are certainly more places that we can go to look at. This is where we're looking currently. These are the places where we're collecting events from. There's a mixture there of social media sites, news and blog feeds, which are a really, really rich source of this type of relationship data, actually. Stack Exchange sites, Reddit, reviews on Hypothesis, for example, and as I mentioned before, very recently via Cambia Lens as well. So we're going to keep adding to this list. This is the initial list. We're working towards launching this service in production, hopefully very soon. I'd be really interested to hear from all of you here today about where you think we should be looking, what types of platforms we should be going to try and get information about some sort of relationship with something that has a DOI assigned to it. For example, I know that a lot of Chinese researchers use WeChat. There's a lot of discussions in WeChat that reference articles. That's a place we could go look. You know, where are the places where you are collaborating, or where you know researchers are collaborating or discussing or talking about research in some way? So we'll have a bit of question time afterwards. So maybe just have a bit of a think about that. But I would love to get your feedback and your ideas about the types of places we should look so we can expand on this this list. So just before we wrap up, I thought I'd take you through a couple of things that you could do possibly with event data. And it is quite a long list. You might be interested in graph modeling, for example. This is a graph model that I did using an open source tool called Neo4j. I just took a small sample of Crossref and DataSite DOIs and looked at the number of mentions. So you can see very quickly you can start to build something that could be quite useful. You might be interested in visualizing the data in some way. You might have an altmetrics dashboard. This could become a data source for your dashboard, or some other type of impact or measurement interface. You might want to use it for discoverability. You might want to use it to build a reading recommendation tool, for example. You could have a look at the Wikipedia pages, for example, that cite DOIs. You might have a subset of DOIs that you're particularly interested in. Go have a look at those Wikipedia pages and check out the co-citations, see what other papers are co-cited, and then build a reading recommendation tool or a researcher recommendation tool off of that. The bottom one's been cut off. I think it said bibliometrics. It's cut off on my screen too. Obviously, this is a really useful data set for bibliometrics. There are a couple of bibliometricians who are already integrating this data into some early research studies. I thought I'd just give you a couple of examples of some of those people who are actually starting to take a look at beta and start integrating it. I'm not sure if Aaron Tang is here. He might be in the other session. I know he's here at the event. I saw this tweet from him just recently online, and I just thought it was really interesting. He wrote a blog post. If you're interested, there's a link to it there. He used the Crossref Event Data API and the OADOI API to calculate the citation advantage of open access articles. And he did it as a little how-to project and did a full review in his blog and provided really, really good steps for any other librarians out there who are perhaps less comfortable using JSON or using APIs, just to give them a sort of a step-by-step guide of how you can integrate with a REST API, because both are REST APIs. Another example is from a service provider. This time it's a collaboration between the Public Knowledge Project and Impact Story. They've just released a prototype called PaperBuzz. It was just a few weeks ago now. And the tool is a way to track the online buzz, basically to see sort of what's hot in research, what's trending. And they use Crossref Event Data as one of the data sources for that. Again, if you're interested in taking a look, their prototype's up online and you can see how they're visualizing some of the data that they're getting from us. Finally, another one that I saw again popped up on Twitter, Stuart Chalk, who's Associate Professor of Chemistry at University of North Florida, has this dashboard. He's got a subset of around 7,000 DOIs that he's particularly interested in because they are papers that refer to a set of chemistry terms that I think he was involved in developing in some way. And so he's built this dashboard to be able to monitor mentions of those articles that he's particularly interested in. So I'm hoping that gives you some ideas. I'm hoping that gives you some encouragement to either go make something cool yourself using this data, or go have some conversations with the vendors that you're using for things like altmetrics or discoverability. Have a chat to them, see what data sources they're using, and think about event data next time you need a data source for relationships. If you need any more information, we have a very, very comprehensive user guide online. It's something like 32,000 words, so if it's daunting at all, please don't feel afraid to come to me and I can talk it through with you on a phone call, or we can just have a chat over a coffee. It is very long, but it is very comprehensive. We also have an email address set up there. If you're interested in being a beta tester, you don't have to register. Plenty of people are using it without registering it. But we share lots of tips and tricks and updates and new information with that group. And they're a fantastic group for us to keep in touch with because we get some brilliant feedback. So if you're interested in that, please email me at that address. Thank you. Is there any questions just before we switch over? Quick questions. But I'll be around until tomorrow. No? All right, let's switch over then.